a Patriots helmet?
Yes, there's actually a story behind that. When it was probably about 10, 12 years ago. I was playing golf with a friend of mine. He has a mutual friend that happened to be Tom Brady and his father, Tom Sr. And we were playing golf in South Carolina, and Tom Brady Sr. asked me, "Hey, we're flying out of Charlotte tomorrow. Can you recommend a hotel?" And I told him, "Hey, look, why don't you stay with me? My wife and family are out of town. We're moving to a new house soon, so it's a mess. But I'll take you to the airport in the morning." And so I wound up putting Tom Sr. in my daughter's room, and then I was going to put the Super Bowl MVP Tom Jr. in my in our guest room. And he said, "No, I don't want to mess it up." And I'm like, "Dude, we're moving. It's going to be messed up tomorrow anyway." And he said, "No, I'll sleep in this room." And he picked my son's room. My son was like 11, and he had a twin bed in there. And so, okay, I'm not going to argue with him. So he slept in the bed. The next day, my wife calls, and I said, "You won't believe this, but Tom Brady stayed overnight here." And my son was like, "Are you kidding me? He wasn't there. I wasn't there." So I come home from work one day, probably a week later, and he's watching an old rerun of the Brady Bunch. Remember the Brady Bunch?
Yeah.
And he's watching on Nickelodeon, and he says to me, and he's like all mad, and he says, "Everything works out for the Brady Bunch." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And he goes, "Marsha lies about knowing Davy Jones, and Davy Jones takes her to the prom. Bobby lies about knowing Joe Namath, and Joe Namath comes to his house." And he goes, "Tom Brady slept in my bed, and nobody believes me." And I thought that was the funniest thing. And I called this buddy of mine that knew Brady. I told him the story. We got to laugh over it. And about 10 days later, this helmet comes to the house. And it's signed to my son, Anthony. It says, "To Anthony, you have the best bed in Charlotte, Tom Brady 12."
I like
And
it.
I was like, that is the coolest thing anybody's ever done for a kid. I couldn't believe how nice that was. And anybody says anything mean about Brady, I'm always like, no, you can dislike him as a player, but that's one straight up good dude.